We are now streaming.
Great. Let's see. I think we'll give folks a few more minutes. Still are looking for a few others to join us.
While we're waiting, can you let us know, is that Sucker Creek State Park there in the cover slide photo?
Katie, do you know?
Yes, yes, it is.
It's pretty sure, but just wanted to know just from my own.
Good eye.
I usually try to, when I copy, we have a database of pictures, and I usually try to make sure I know which park it is before I put it in a PowerPoint, because people always ask.
While we're waiting, can you let us know, is that Sucker Creek State Park there in the cover slide photo?
Did you hit replay on that? I heard a repeat. It was an instant replay. Like, I think did I say that right? Was that an instant replay?
Maybe someone's got the YouTube feed on too, and there's just a little delay.
Oh. Yeah.
Yes,
Katie,
it's my YouTube feed that I had to mute it so that you don't hear it twice.
not instant replay then. See,
There's a delay.
the context is right. All right, so it's 8:35. Let's go ahead and get started. And as people join in, we will invite them. We have Katie Gothier will be assisting and inviting and letting people in as they join. My name is Helena Kesh. Thank you everyone for taking the time to be a part of the Rules Advisory Committee for Oregon Parks and Recreation Department's hunting rule. I'm a policy analyst with government relations and the policy unit, and we are here to discuss making some minor updates to the hunting rule itself, cleaning up some of the park language, such as location and such, and then introducing a hunting map that we'll make available on our agency website. The intent is to really just clarify what the hunting boundaries are in state parks, not to minimize them at all, as much as just to clarify them, and just to allow that language to exist, or those boundaries to exist, in a hunting map. There are some areas where we did make some minor changes, and we will discuss that with everyone here today. Before we get started, I just want to go around and let folks introduce themselves, and then please also let us know, your involvement in the hunting world. So let's go ahead and get started with Brian.
Hi, I'm Brian Wolfer. I'm the game program manager for Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife in our wildlife division. And so as the game program manager, I oversee all of our programs that involve hunting, both game bird and big game ungulate programs.
Great. All right, let's go with Scott.
I'm Scott Youngblood. I'm the Willamette River Greenway Park Manager, so I manage about 70 parks along the Willamette River. Many of those you can hunt in currently.
Great, thank you. Next, we'll go to Mike.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Tody. I serve as the Conservation Director with the Oregon Hunters Association. So you see OHA up there, and if you Googled OHA right now, the first 12 pages would be something like Oregon Health Authority with the current pandemic. But there is another OHA here in Oregon, and I'm here to represent them. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for being here. We'll go with Paul.
Morning, everyone. I'm Paul Riley. I'm the Regional Program Coordinator on the coast for OPRD, and happy to be here.
Thank you, Paul. And next we'll go to Ryan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Sparks. I'm an Operations Support Manager in the Willamette Valley region of Oregon State Parks. And part of my position helps manage the program of our Willamette River Greenways.
And Katie.
Hi, Katie Gauthier with the Government Relations and Policy Unit.
Great. All right. Again, I want to thank you all for taking the time to meet with everyone here this morning. Hopefully this will be pretty straightforward. I'm going to share my screen and show you the rule itself, and we'll go through and discuss the different changes that have been introduced and any other recommended changes or questions and such. I will just type them alongside so we can track those changes in real time. Does that sound good? Okay. So I will do a share screen here. Make sure I pick the right screen for sharing. And you tell me if you could see that rule. Great. All right. So what we're talking about today is...
Well, no, you might make it slightly bigger.
Oh, good. Thanks for that heads up. Does that look good?
Yes.
Perfect. This is chapter 736 of the Oregon Administrative Rule, Division 10. And we're looking at the park resources section. And there's a lot of different language in here about park resources, and we're specifically going to focus in on the hunting aspect. So I'm going to scroll down. There is one change that's not necessarily hunting related here in number 5, just talks about how much fruit and other things people can gather in a state park, going from 5 gallons to 1 gallon per person per day. In case you needed to know, now you do. Further down, number 8. This is where we've added some language to really kind of clearly just make it clear from the gate that hunting is not allowed in any area closed by the director or designee for public safety or park resource protection purposes. And the department shall post safety zone signs at designated park entrances. And the purpose for this, and I'll open it up for comment, is really to just spell out that, you know, not every section of state parks is open to hunting. So just as a preliminary conversation point, you know, there are areas that are going to be closed, and you'll see safety zones in other areas where hunting is allowed if there's a need for us to minimize hunting if there's a lot of park visitation. So that's kind of the reason for this language included here. Does anybody want to comment on this or have a clarification?
Helena, this is Ryan.
Hi, Ryan.
The one comment, and I think Scott Youngblood and I have talked about this a little bit, is that the last sentence there, where it shall be posted at designated park entrance. I don't know if there's a way to reword that, because some of our properties you come in by boat, or especially like the greenways, you don't come in through a designated park entrance, but we would post it as you're approaching the property or coming into that area. So I don't know if there's a way to change it, just because not every property has like a designated entrance.
Okay. Mike?
Yeah, I'm just coming up to speed on this, Helena, so apologize. First time I've actually seen these here. So just the one thing that kind of caught my attention there with the new number 9 was you'd mentioned, you know, in places where we prohibit, and we're certainly, OHA is certainly supportive of, from public safety standpoints and safety zones and things like that. We see those on ODFW wildlife areas and other places that are public. But you mentioned, in places that are have a lot of use sort of thing. And I've certainly seen hunting areas, designated hunting areas that I would call have a lot of use. So I'm just kind of curious if there's like a threshold that's being discussed around, how much that is, or maybe that's something we'll get to later.
Yeah. I think it's a good conversation for now. I think really, back to Ryan's piece really quick, the department shall post safety zone signs at designated park areas. Does that satisfy that piece, Ryan?
If I can jump in at a turn without being called on, I would almost suggest department shall post safety zone signs at primary entry points, to cover these isolated parcels along the Willamette, et cetera. Primary park entry points would be one suggestion.
Yeah,
Like
I'd
that?
agree with that. I think that's good because generally we do know where folks are coming from. And so those pinch points would be a good spot to have those signs.
I agree. Yeah.
Good. Okay. So I made the update there, primary park entry points. And then to Mike's question about the heavy visitation or the heavy, do we need to clearly spell out whether we're talking about hunters or whether we're talking about just park visitors? Because that's the crux of what you're saying there, right, Mike?
Yeah, that's correct. That's just something that kind of caught my attention there with that perspective.
Okay. So I think as we go through here, we can see if there's another area that we can call that out a little more specifically. Does that sound good?
That sounds great. Just a clarification there, so we kind of know.
Sounds good. So the next section, we're talking about discharging of firearms is prohibited in park properties, except while hunting and trapping wildlife under the following provisions. So this is where we're saying, here's how you can hunt. And A starts with in compliance with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife hunting rules and regulations. So we're still pointing to ODF and W's hunting rules and regs for folks to follow. B, in those park properties where hunting of game species and unprotected species is specifically allowed by this rule. And C, trapping is permitted only at Willamette Greenway parcels open to hunting with written authorization by the park manager. And D, unprotected species can only be hunted during authorized hunting season, except as authorized by the park manager. And E, in areas identified on OPRD hunting map found at the department website. F, hunting shall be permitted with shotguns or bows and arrows only during ODFW authorized seasons in designated parks. Refer to OPRD hunting map for location and details on game species permitted for hunting at each park location. And then G, hunting shall be permitted with rifle in Lapine State Park only during ODFW authorized seasons. Refer to OPRD hunting map for location and details on game species permitted within the park. So those are the provisions, and I will open it up for comment at this point. Scott?
Yeah, I have a question, and Mike might be able to help me better on this one. It says discharging of firearms is prohibited, blah, 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 blah. You can hunt with a bow and a gun, a shotgun. So shouldn't that very first sentence also include archery in some way? Because it starts out just firearms, but then lower down it says it's firearms and archery.
I'll scroll up and show that. So this piece right here,
Number 9, it left out archery basically.
so do we want to, you're recommending we include bow and arrow, or should we just say archery?
What would you say on that, Mike?
I think I see your point there. I'm just struggling to come up with some terminology and trying to think of other places where I've seen something like that, Scott, in terms of, so if we look at, and this is, I trying not to get us down a rabbit trail, but want to give you the example here. If we look at how the current ODFW hunting regulation synopsis is, there's clearly archery only seasons. There are muzzle loader only seasons, and then they have something they refer to as any weapon. So you can use a rifle, a shotgun, a bow, whatever. You cannot use a crossbow yet, but nonetheless, discharging of, I don't know that typically when people see the term firearm, they're thinking about something that involves a gun there and doesn't involve an archery thing. So discharging of, I don't know, Brian, I'm going to stumble and put Brian on the spot here and see if he has a suggestion. He and I work on some of these things in other places. So
Yeah, so for us, with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, within our rules, we say a posted safety zone is closed to hunting and shooting. And so we don't designate there that the shooting is firearm only, but many of our individual properties, we restrict the discharge of firearms except while hunting, still allowing people to, I guess, potentially bring in a target and shoot with a bow. So that's kind of a question for you is, are there places where people would bring in a portable target to bow shoot? Do you want to allow that? Is there a problem with that? And so you could either say, discharge of firearm, or you could say discharge of firearm or bow, or you could maybe more generally just say hunting and shooting is prohibited except during authorized season in certain areas.
Yeah, I think personally I like the latter because we do have in our own rules that I don't have it in front of me, but projectiles are limited in many areas in state parks.
Yeah, and many the definition of firearm kind of varies throughout statute, I think, whether or not you're talking about cities and, discharge of firearms in the cities is much different than what's considered a firearm, say for a felon in possession of a firearm. Firearm has some different definitions. And so that would be one way to.
Hunting and shooting, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Is prohibited in park properties. And does that encompass what you were thinking about, Scott? Mike, does that sit well?
yeah, I think the intent here is, we've seen this burgeoning population of shooters, recreational shooters out there. I mean, full disclosure here, folks, before I came on staff with OHA, I spent a little over 3 decades with ODF, and on state forest shooting is quite an issue there, and that's what we're trying to limit or regulate here. I think that's the way it's put there would cover that for you.
I agree.
Yeah, it's a little redundant to say hunting and shooting prohibited except while hunting and trapping. And so you might clarify that hunting and shooting prohibited in parks except while engaged in legal hunting and trapping under the following provisions or something. I don't know.
Yeah, you may even simplify hunting and shooting is prohibited in park properties except under the following provisions.
Yeah, that simplifies it.
Okay. Just eliminate all of that language right there that's highlighted like that. Hunting and shooting is prohibited on public properties except under the following provisions.
We just need to
You
now
should add trapping.
yeah, we need to figure out a way to work in trapping.
Hunting, shooting, and trapping. Can we say
Yep.
that? Hunting, comma, shooting, and trapping is prohibited in park property except under the following provisions. See nods, very cool. Okay. Let's take a look at this. I'll scroll up here and just leave it here for a minute.
On B, I'd like to ask Brian and Mike, do we need to specify game species and unprotected species?
My comment there, sorry, Brian, would just be, I think that's useful to kind of clarify those, and particularly if we're looking at Eurasian doves and some things like that now that are becoming more and more prevalent, particularly probably in the Willamette Greenway system and other places where we see them, that it's good to point that out.
Yeah, and your previous rules kind of, reference game wildlife, upland game birds, waterfowl. And so I think part of maybe the need for game and unprotected is just to clarify changes. I think some places didn't distinguish game from non-game within the kind of previous rule set. So I think this clarifies that you can shoot, say, a nutria as an unprotected species in the Willamette Greenways when you're hunting out there.
Another, I guess, two questions here. So Helen, I need your help with C. So am I correct in the assumption that trapping is only going to be allowed at Willamette Greenway parcels throughout the statewide system? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then is there any conflict that we have when we do our own, and whether it's through contractor or someone else, whether we're doing our own trapping or doing our own shooting for unprotected species on park property? Does this preclude us from doing those sort of things?
The way it reads, it does not. So I think this is just to the public on what they can do at the Willamette Greenway parcels. And then for our own staff to do natural resource kind of mitigation, I think it's still within the scope of our body of work.
Is there a separate OAR for dealing with problem animals, damaged animals on OPRD managed lands?
I believe there is, and it goes under natural resources. That speaks to what we do with problem animals, invasive.
Thanks.
But I don't know it off the top of my head.
And we would also have a special use permit if we were to hire a contractor to do something with invasive species.
Brian?
So, yeah, instead of pushing the little button. So just to kind of unpack that, I was curious, how much that changes from the trapping standpoint. And so I was looking at the old rule. And so it looks like previously trapping was permitted by permit at Bowers Rock, Deschutes State Recreation Area, Elijah Bristow State Park, Willamette Mission State Park. And then in the Willamette Greenways, it was allowed without special permit, any properties that were open to hunting. Is that kind of correct? And so this takes that by special permit off from Bowers, Deschutes, Elijah Bristow, and Willamette, but adds it to the Willamette Greenway.
Correct. And Scott, do you want to clarify that at all on that piece with the Willamette Greenway?
No, I think that's accurate. What Brian said is it just adds that permit to the Greenway system if you're going to be trapping. And just in my experience, not to say that someone hasn't been trapping out there and I don't know about it, but in the last 14 years, I've never had anyone ask or heard of anyone ask for a trapping permit at Bowers. Just for a little background there.
Okay, yeah, I was kind of curious if anybody had been receiving permits for those 4 areas that would close. Just to, to make sure everybody's aware, when it comes to like the Willamette River Greenway parcels, the Willamette's a navigable waterway, and so trapping is allowed as a state waterway up to the ordinary high water line. Because the properties open to trapping currently are only accessible by boat, I think anything that allows hunting is boat access only, doesn't have overland access. I think most trapping occurring is water-based trapping. People are coming in by boat. There may be a little bit of dry land trapping for a raccoon or a species like that, but I would guess most is water-based. It's targeting beaver or otter. And so I think a lot of that would still continue under the ordinary high water line. But that's just something to be aware of, is that there would still be trapping occurring likely. There likely is still. It's just a question of whether or not the person can move any of the gear above the ordinary high water line.
Yeah.
I was going to comment that so we do have a fair amount of greenways that do have upland access through roads and parking lots and stuff like that. So we do have a fair amount of locations where people do gain access from upland areas. And then the one thing I was going to comment on was, and this is more maybe for us internally, is we'll have to figure out what does authorization from the park manager look like. So to the question about the permits in the past, I've managed Willamette Mission. I've been working on the greenways for about 20 years, and I've never seen, I wouldn't even know what permit to issue in the past for trapping at Willamette Mission State Park. We've never done that. And so we just want to internally clarify what, I like the fact that it's actually not requiring a permit. It's just asking for authorization from the park manager. That seems like it simplifies it a little bit, but we probably internally would need to figure out what does that mechanism look like that somebody would go about contacting the park manager for approval.
Okay. Scott?
I was just going to agree with Brian. The only trapping I've ever seen on the Greenway was actually water-based, most likely on DSL property, and saying beaver and otter. And the only upland trapping I've seen since I've lived in Oregon was really for like a pest species, like a particular skunk or a particular a raccoon at someone's private property. So I haven't even seen that on state park property.
Okay. Mike?
Just a kind of a question for the group here, whether or not you feel this is worth reaching out to like Oregon Trappers Association. I'm not a trapper, but they might be able to give you some sense of the use that they see going out there, being likely water-based. The trappers that I've been familiar with in the past have all been water-based, but somebody mentioned that there's a fair amount of overland access there too, so I could be wrong there, or maybe even Derek Broman could help us with that one, Brian.
We did.
Yeah.
Doug Nichols to today's wrap.
Can you repeat that, Helena? Sorry, I started to say something.
Sorry, we did invite Doug Nichols with Oregon Trappers Association to this rack. He's just not present. But I can run this by him. I could send it to him for review. And then the public comment period, we'll get to that point, but then that'll give an opportunity for him to comment there as well.
Yeah. And
Brian?
So then just the clarification, Ryan, there are a lot of greenway parcels that have overland access. I can't think of any off the top of my head that also allow hunting and then therefore currently allow trapping. The ones I think of off the top of my head, kind of listed in the current rules, are ones that are boat access that allow the hunting. I think that's what I was trying to say. And maybe Scott can correct me if there's a couple of drive up ones, but when hunters call me asking about hunting on the greenways, that's kind of a general that I give them is you need to check on the individual property, but be aware that pretty much anything open to hunting is going to be boat access only.
And that's usually what I tell people too, Brian, because that's the easy way to explain it. But I do think where there are 4 that you can drive to and hunt at, and they're kind of that's not the way it was intended originally, but that's how it is. So those are the ones I send to people who are land-based hunters, to those 4 parks.
Okay. Any questions about the unprotected species can only be hunted during authorized hunting season, except as authorized by the park manager. Brian?
So, so in previous conversations, I believe what you're trying to get at is limiting some of that hunting in kind of high use areas during the summer when people are out picnicking, et cetera, for unprotected species. And so, you know, authorized hunting seasons is a little bit vague. You know, unprotected species can be hunted year round. and so but oftentimes, not always, oftentimes, you know, they're hunted opportunistically while people are hunting other things. And so the authorized seasons, I guess as written, could almost be construed to being year round. We do have even if we were to say big game or game bird, we do have a year round cougar season that is a big game season. And so if what you're looking at is, you know, having hunting during those traditional fall, winter months, early spring months, then you might say unprotected species can only be hunted during authorized deer, elk, or game bird seasons. And so then our deer seasons, elk seasons, game bird seasons really then target that really nothing before August 1, many areas not till around September. I'm kind of curious to hear from one of the hunting groups like Mike Toady on that, but I know from previous conversations your concern was, you know, not having hunting in that kind of June, July time period.
High visitation.
Right. So June, July would be, you know, I live in the Albany area and waterfowl hunt a lot, right? So just by that alone, you're looking at, you know, the archeries. There are some special seasons that Brian talked about that open as early as August 1st, or some of those might be pushed back to August 15th now. The general archery season starts the last Saturday in August, just about every year. Yeah. And as we know, there's waterfowl seasons that go through all the way through March 10th. Specifically in Northwest Oregon with the goose permit season and some others there. So if that's, you know, if we're specifically trying to limit some use of shooting unprotected species in that, you know, June, July timeframe, that would do it for you. I'm not sure Brian maybe has a better idea about turkey hunting in that April 15th to May 31st time period there in some of those greenway parcels or other parcels.
Yes, I would assume that turkey hunting is probably somewhat limited, but if this said during authorized deer, elk, and game bird seasons, then that would cover turkey for those few places that people are hunting turkeys.
So something like that.
Yeah, I think that becomes much more specific to the time periods.
Okay. And then moving further down, is it okay if I keep scrolling a little bit? Right there.
So do you have you know, I'm a little bit familiar with some of your maps already. Are you creating a brand new map there that's going to identify this? Or because I know like your Willamette Greenway parcel, really good map that shows all the river miles and all that, kind of has the icons that indicate what's permitted or not permitted in those places there. Is there going to be a standalone document that's a map for this?
It's going to be similar to what you're referring to, and it's just going to identify the boundary, the park boundary, and then what species is allowed to be hunted there based on ODFW rules and regs. And so, yeah, it'll have those icons that you're referring to. So it'll just be a little bit more specific. And so once the rules are wrapped up, then our GIS folks will develop that hunting map and clearly just spell out those boundary areas as well as what's allowed in those areas based on ODFW rules. So yeah, and it'll be online, and that will also be shared with other entities that provide maps for hunters on mobile apps like Onyx and other groups like that. We'll just share that with them so that they have an up-to-date park boundary map, and it's just a little more consistent with, so that everyone has just consistent information about those boundaries.
So the only bit of input, sorry, Brian, was just there may be, and I'm not familiar enough with it right now, but I'm guessing something like Lapine State Park, there are some parcels you have where hunting might be allowed on a portion of it, but we don't want it on other portions, and just somehow clearly indicate those so we can avoid any unintended consequences there.
Right.
Yep.
Brian.
If I can, so this part, I'm really excited to see state parks have some more detailed maps showing where hunting's allowed and where some of the closures are. You might look to some examples from the Corps of Engineers. The Corps of Engineers has done that within the Willamette project area with detailed maps showing where campgrounds are, where closures are related to dams, and so where you can hunt within some of the reservoir impoundments and others. And that has become a very helpful resource to hunters that are trying to do the right thing and follow the rules, and that's really clarified where they can and can't go.
Okay, take a look at that. Just going back to the trapping piece, what if we just said, trapping is permitted, but basically anywhere? Like if we took out the Willamette Greenway language to allow trapping anywhere with a permit, to kind of cover those areas, Brian, that you had talked about earlier? Or do we want to just limit it to Willamette Greenway only?
So from my standpoint, it doesn't sound like you've issued many permits for those other parcels, but there may be times when, when someone wants to trap and it's an appropriate time, and you've got some other resource needs that would support that. Like I don't think, because we have this for a lot of our wildlife areas, is trapping's closed except by written authorization from the wildlife area manager for probably half of our properties, roughly half, that are high public use properties, just to avoid conflict. And we don't get overrun with requests for those permits. And so if you were to say trapping's permitted only with written authorization, parks that you don't want to allow that at, wouldn't have that, but places like the Willamette Greenway, even within like certain parts of Elijah Bristow, I think I thought I was aware that in the past there's been a few permits issued there. It still allows that to happen, but then where it's occurring at, and you also know the time and whether or not you want to advise other users.
Okay, Scott?
Yeah, I just want to say if you made that change, then you're opening the possibility of trapping up to 280 different parks that didn't have trapping ever available before, like Smith Rock and Silver Falls. Not that a lot of people would be asking for that, but that's one more thing the manager has to manage and manage that expectation of the public, where now the public may think that there's been historical trapping at Smith Rock, for instance, because it's the way the OAR is written. And those parcels Brian mentioned, which were Bowers, I'm sorry, I can't remember, Elijah Bristow, that did allow permitted trapping, were Greenway parcels, most of them. So they started out on the Willamette anyway, or just like the rest of the greenways.
True, opening it up would be a Pandora's box. And you don't know, like, what's gonna, what'll evolve and what people will want to do as well. And so you kind of consider some of that.
Yep.
I personally think opening it up to authorization by the park manager is the way to go, just based on fur prices are extremely low, trapper numbers are low. I can't imagine us getting an influx of these requests. And so I personally think opening it up to written permission is the way to go, and it gives the park manager some flexibility to make those decisions. But that's my own personal opinion.
I just to chime in here, I really don't have any thoughts on that either way on that. I think, typically those places that are higher use, trappers don't want to be there anyways. So if it just simplifies the rule to say, trapping is permitted only with prior written authorization by the park manager, it's really up to you if you want to specify the greenway or not.
Okay. Could we say something like trapping is permitted at park properties open to hunting with written authorization by park manager? Then it will just really limit it to those same park boundaries that allow for hunting, instead of opening it up to 200 and some odd park properties. How does that?
That would definitely narrow it down. Just got to make sure that the wording of it doesn't imply that anything open to hunting is open to trapping. So let's kind of wordsmith that and see what it comes up with.
Trapping is permitted only at park properties that are open to hunting with written authorization by park manager. By the park
Hunting and with written authorization.
Sorry, say that again.
Hunting and with written authorization. Yep.
Okay. Does that sit well with everybody? Scott? Cool. Okay.
I can live with that.
All right. So last we left off with the hunting map found at the department website. Any other questions on the hunting map at all?
Looking forward to seeing it, and I think once I see it, I may have some additional input, or it's the type of thing we can ping our membership with and see if they have any thoughts on how to make it more clear or understandable, something.
Good. And then the next one is about the use of shotguns and bow and arrows.
I had one question about, would we preclude muzzleloader from this section? And if so, is there a reason why?
That's a great question. There's a lot of places that allow shotgun and muzzleloader. I'm thinking of like Umatilla National Wildlife Refuge, where they have some deer hunting where you can do either or, but then there's also specific to some ODFW wildlife management areas where they don't allow muzzleloaders. So it's, I don't know if you're in a position to kind of think of a case by case scenario. Certainly in a place where, like Lapine, if you're going to allow a rifle, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't allow a muzzleloader there. So,
Scott?
Kind of a little bit different topic on this, and Brian, I think, might be the expert. Does ODFW allow crossbow hunting with like an ADA exception? Okay.
No, we do not. So crossbows can be used for unprotected species, but they are not legal to hunt any game species with.
Some states do, so I didn't know.
Yeah, we have a permit that a person can get for a device that attaches to a modern compound bow and holds that at full draw. They have to get it to full draw and it'll hold it, but it's not a crossbow. It's attached to the modern kind of upright, vertical bow.
Ryan?
So mine is more a question to the group, kind of bouncing off of what Paul was asking. My own personal knowledge is not that great on muzzleloaders. So I guess for me, it's what kind of distance would the projectile go? Is it similar to so part of the reason, Paul, for the shotgun is in particular greenways and things like that are sometimes relatively small and have homes adjacent, things like that. So that's part of the reason was for safety reasons of the distance of projectile. So I don't know that, I'm not that familiar with muzzle loaders to know if there's any safety reasons that we wouldn't want to allow them because of the distance it would travel or something.
So and Mike and Brian can chime in too. In Oregon, muzzle loaders have to be open breech, no scope, iron sights. And so I'm 150 yards is probably a shooting range most people would be taking a shot at, and probably not much longer than that. So that, from my perspective, puts it relatively close to what a shotgun slug would be capable of doing. And so I personally don't see the efficacy difference between those two methods of take, but I'd like to hear from Brian and Mike and their thoughts on that.
So a lot of what you said is correct. The nuance difference, though, is that when hunting a muzzleloader only season, then you're restricted. The open breech is, actually went away a couple years ago, but through kind of a bit of an error in our rule keeping, it stayed in the books. And so that, open to the weather is going to change. But we require loose powders, not Pyrodex. We don't allow sabots. And so that definitely does limit the range. But those things are allowed during any legal weapon. And so, for the state rules, if someone's hunting during any legal weapon, kind of our center fire rifle seasons is what people consider them, then they can use a scope. They can use Pyrodex powders, and that increases the range. In general, bows, archery is your shortest range. Shotgun extends that out a little bit with, say, slugs. Muzzleloader extends it out a little bit farther. Muzzleloaders are a rifle. And so if you're allowing rifles, we differentiate them as muzzleloading rifles versus center fire rifles. And so if you're allowing rifles at Lapine, then as written here, my interpretation is you could use a muzzleloading rifle. And then that center fire rifle is the one that's the longest range projectiles. And
Mike?
so before we leave this, I have a couple other questions, but I think maybe more discussion on the muzzleloader component is good.
Go ahead, Brian. What are your other?
Well, so I was trying to think of where this changes stuff to let you know, from an ODFW standpoint, on the properties we manage, we do allow rifles, even center fire rifles at many of the more remote properties, kind of less use. For our, say, Willamette Valley and kind of main high use wildlife areas like Fern Ridge Wildlife Area, E.E. Wilson, Savi, those we do limit to shotgun or bow and arrow. We tend to not allow muzzle loaders on those because that does extend the range a little bit, but we do allow both muzzle loaders and center fires in some of our more remote properties that are not valley properties with lots and lots of visitors.
Would it be helpful if we listed the type of weapon or device used on the hunting map? And that could be a park boundary decision, or is that?
So the Corps of Engineers does do that. They have some areas where it's, and so this is an example of how a map could look under that scenario. The Corps of Engineers is managing properties associated with reservoirs. Sometimes those properties, extend up into the uplands, into the forest. And so they do have places where hunting's allowed. And then there's some, just a handful of places where they allow longer range weapons on their ownership, and they designate them as such on their maps. So that is an option. I was kind of wondering about, Canyon Creek State Park is one that currently allows rifles, is my understanding with the rules. It has that interspersed property between you guys, your ownership, and BLM. And so that was one thing I noticed here, is that would be a pretty big change for Canyon Creek, with some potential kind of what piece of ground am I currently standing on? And, on this 40, 80 acres, I can't use the rifle. But if I walk across this line that's not fenced, now I can, because I'm on BLM. And in a place like Canyon Creek, I would think that there are probably places where a rifle could be used safely during these winter times, kind of lower use. But especially in that mixed ownership.
This is Ryan again. I guess I would be inclined to leave the shotguns and bows and arrows as our kind of default. Because a lot of the properties are kind of like Brian was describing, whether they're in the Willamette Valley or not, our properties tend to be a little bit busier, kind of like the properties he was describing that are ODF and Ws. So leaving that as our default, and then looking at, do we need to add additional park properties to kind of the Lapine list? Is there, other ones that, and that's where I think it's good to have the statewide conversation, because I'm just not as familiar with our other properties, around the state. So maybe looking at other properties that might be added into that category, where a little bit wider variety could be, rifles could be used or something like that.
Mike?
Is there I'm just curious what the change is here. Obviously, we're looking at Lapine, but is there a list of OPRD properties where currently a rifle or muzzleloader would be allowed? Or are we kind of figuring that out here?
We're figuring that out here. Brian?
Yeah. So currently the Willamette Greenways, under your current rules, only allow shotguns and archery. Sucker Creek only allows hunting of upland game birds, except within the safety zone. And so by default, then that's going to be archery and shotgun. Nobody's hunting chukar over there with archery, but it could be done. Cottonwood Canyon is open to game and upland, and so there's not that blanket weapon. So that one, it's currently allowed, and I think some people do it. Lapine is one of those that's currently written to allow hunting of deer only, but doesn't restrict rifle. It just restricts where you can hunt deer. And Deschutes River State Recreation Area, I don't see a restriction there. It's game wildlife. So yeah, there's a number of them that it's currently technically legal at, because there's not that blanket provision.
I'll scroll back up.
Yeah, most of them though, like your waterfowl, you limit waterfowl hunting only at Bowers Rock, Elijah Bristow, Fort Stevens, Willamette Mission, Government Island, Rooster Rock, Benson, Starvation Mare. And so just by restricting those two waterfowl only, you're restricting it to archery shotgun because rifles are not allowed. So there are very few places right now where you currently allow rifles. And I see that as the Deschutes, as I interpret your rules, the Deschutes, Lapine, Cottonwood Canyon, are the only ones that I think you're allowing it at.
So do we need to include the word Lapine in the section G? Or do we add those other park locations that you just mentioned, Brian, in here as well? Or do we just refer people to the hunting map for details on where rifles could be used?
Two comments on that, Helena. One would be, I'd be curious to know why in places you can currently use a rifle, why we would eliminate that. And if there's good justification for it, then we just need to vet that out.
Yeah.
And the other, I think, because it's a little bit special and beyond some of these things, it'd probably be good to go ahead and list those in the written rule here rather than just do it on a map indication. I think that just makes it a little stronger for OSP enforcement and some other things.
Yeah. So the I'm trying to think here. So the government, let's see, which one was I looking at? The Deschutes River State Recreation Area. Is there some intergovernmental agreement there that would prohibit rifles that's not in this particular rule?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I have to check with the park. Scott?
I was just gonna say, sorry, I'm not any help on these dry side parks. And I actually didn't know you could hunt with a rifle at any of them. I thought our entire system was shotgun and archery only. So I missed that in our OERs.
Yeah, and so as I interpret your current OARs, you don't have many weapons restrictions. You restrict the type of game that can be hunted, which brings in a weapon restriction. And then the weapon restricted ones are really the Willamette Greenway is the one that jumps out as kind of restricting weapons, the weapon type for hunting in there. So I think this is good. It's the question though is, it looks like you're not looking to change Lapine, and is it an intention? And then like Mike said, why, what's the issue with the other two? And if there's a reason not to, as far as I'm concerned, then, hey, let's talk through that. But just so we know, though, there's three of them that my interpretation is you can use a rifle.
These three here, correct?
Yes.
And I think from the conversations I've heard, I don't think we're looking to make any changes to prohibit what's currently been going on over there. So, and I briefly talked with the region manager on the east side of the mountains there, and I don't think that they were inclined to make any regulation changes that would impact opportunities for hunting over there. So I don't think that's necessary to make a change. So if we need to clarify then that they are still allowed, then that we probably should do that.
Yeah, and it does though bring up the point that having this clearly spelled out in G is helpful, because it's complicated right now to try to figure out where you can and can't use certain weapons, because for the most part it's regulated in your rules by whether or not you're hunting waterfowl, upland game, or big game. So this would be a big help, I think, to making it clear.
Because I was just rereading the Deschutes River one, and it, in the regulations, it does specify in the park where you can do that hunting. So, that's where the map could come into play. A good map, that somebody can look at and see where that defined space is within the park boundaries.
Yeah, and the same thing for Lapine. Currently, you're allowing deer hunting, I think, north of the Power Line Road or something like that. It's in none of these do I think that it's a complete property boundary to boundary allowance. I think the map is a very important part of that.
Right.
And so with that, just a little wordsmithing there, maybe say hunting shall be permitted with a rifle in portions of, or, just kind of bring that up front and then rely on the map for the actual, so we don't have to get into some long written description
Okay.
of the specific area.
Yep. And then it would be, I think, very good for you to follow up with the managers there on the dry side, as Scott puts it, and see if kind of their interpretations are the same as the way I interpret the current rules.
And I've been through Cottonwood State Park, folks, but if there's, as an example, and I'm not advocating for this obviously, but if there's a real reason why we don't want rifles there, then let's talk about that and make this is the time to do that. So
I haven't heard of anything come up from anyone in regards to not allowing rifle use at Cottonwood at all. Okay. So everyone good with the rifle language in this section G? Hunting shall be permitted with rifle in portions of Lapine State Park, Cottonwood Canyon State Park, and Deschutes River State Recreation Area only during ODFW authorized seasons. Refer to OPRD hunting map for location and details on game species permitted within the park. Sound good?
Okay.
The next section really just kind of cleans up the language and says hunting waterfowl is allowed in a portion of the following park boundaries. And then we're talking about Benson State Recreation Area, Bowers Rock State Park, Elijah Bristow State Park, Fort Stevens State Park, Government Island State Recreation Area, Meyer State Park, Rooster Rock State Park, Starvation Creek State Park, Sucker Creek State Park, and Grand Island in Yamhill County. Next.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead.
Scroll back up a little bit. Let me. So here we're designating it as waterfowl, which you currently have waterfowl only in some of your parks. And so now I'm thinking like Sucker Creek, the hunting that's currently going on there is primarily chukar. Like there might be a duck on the creek every once in a while, but it's an upland bird state park hunting spot. So so I don't know if you have an upland bird section after this waterfowl section.
No, I don't think so.
And so currently Sucker Creek is open. So the current rule for Sucker Creek is seasonal hunting of upland game birds is allowed, except within 500 feet of camping areas and posted safety zones. So Sucker doesn't really fit here. If you were to change waterfowl to game birds, then that substantially changes the hunting that's currently going on in Benson and Bowers Rock and those that are currently only open to waterfowl. So I almost think you need a new kind of sub rule for upland. Upland hunting is allowed at, or something to that effect. Or, yeah, I mean, so you could put Sucker Creek under F, hunting of game species, but then that also is a change from currently it's not open to deer hunting.
Right. Right. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but Sucker Creek does allow waterfowl and the upland bird is different than that. And
So-
so do we put it in both places?
So currently it does not allow waterfowl
Sucker Creek does not allow waterfowl?
under your current rules. I don't know why it couldn't, except that there's really no waterfowl interest there just because of the size of the creek. And the only places that you'd reasonably find a duck would be within that closure of the campground where it kind of opens up and there's room for a duck to fly into the creek. But so waterfowl's not really an issue there, but it's the current rules are a little bit messy. Did I say that out loud? And so we're trying to clean that up. I'm just trying to think of how Sucker Creek fits into this new structure. Because I think it might be your only one that currently is limited to upland bird hunting only.
Upland bird species?
Yeah, upland game birds.
I don't know if we can say that though, because in previous spots we've said that they can hunt different species at those parks. So we can't really say that it's only allowed at Sucker Creek.
Yeah. Well, so currently for that previous list that we're seeing the bottom of there, Rooster Rock, Starvation, those are currently limited to waterfowl only.
Mhm.
And so your current rule 8C, and I'm looking at that on my other screen here, says while seasonally hunting waterfowl at the following park properties: Bowers, Elijah Bristow, Fort Stevens, portions of Fort Stevens, the portion of Willamette Mission at Grand Island, Government Island State Recreation Area, not above the high water mark, Rooster Rock, Benson, Starvation, Mayor. So those are the ones that are currently limited to waterfowl hunting only. No big game, no upland game. So really kind of focusing that hunting in the water areas.
So why could we not keep this language? Paul, hunting of
You could,
birds?
I think you could switch it around a bit and say at Sucker Creek State Park, hunting of upland game birds is the only allowed take, or something along those lines. I just think the way it's written there, it contradicts what's been said previously.
Yeah.
At Sucker Creek State Park, hunting of upland, what is it? Game bird?
Birds.
And the whole, in a portion, right?
Yeah.
In a
So I'd
portion-
probably word it at Sucker Creek State Park, only hunting of upland game birds is allowed.
in a portion of the park.
Yeah.
Okay,
And then you'll just have to figure out where to stick that in.
yeah. That might go before, yeah, I'll figure it out, but it might even sit before this. This is a standalone before we talk about waterfowl and then the other portion. So the rest of this waterfowl portion, these parks that are listed here, look okay to you all? Removing Sucker Creek?
Yeah, I had one question for Brian and Mike about navigable waterways and hunting of waterfowl. So if it's I don't even know which specific park, but if there's a state park that has a lake within its boundaries, can people hunt that lake regardless of what we have here based on navigable waterway laws? If they're not, I'm just curious of how that stands, the mean high water line.
So typically, when we talk about navigable waterways, we're talking about those flowing waters, those rivers that were used to transport. So when you have a pond or a lake that's, you know, fully contained, it's not going to be navigable. Navigability, as I understand it, off the top of my head, without being prepared for this question, was really kind of set up over that commercial trade of goods, and so really around those flowing waters and whether or not commercial over water trading was happening. And so within those areas, yeah, hunting happens. So, you know, the Willamette River is a great example, as is the Columbia River. Those are some of our larger navigable waterways. People can hunt up to the ordinary high water line when they're outside of city limits. Where these individual property rules start coming into play, you know, really is, can a person set up in the brush below the ordinary or above the ordinary high water line, shooting out into the state waterway, and then retrieval of game is a big issue. So someone could, even if you're closed, you have properties along the Willamette that are closed to hunting, person could bring a boat in, hunt from their boat, or even hunt from the bank below the ordinary high water line. But if they drop a bird that falls on the closure area, well, now they can't continue their hunt to go look for that bird. It's kind of a lost bird. So in some of the popular hunting areas, you know, it is nice for a hunter if that upland allows hunting also, so that they can legally retrieve and get on. But anyway, maybe I got a little bit too much into the weeds there for your question.
No, that's a great answer. Thank you.
Scott?
I was just to follow up what Brian said. I think the navigable waters discussion is like a whole other 4-hour session that we could go through, but they have to be ruled navigable waters by the court. So there's several lists of them, both rivers, lakes, and whatever else on the DSL website. So that's a really good source for that, that particular information.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott.
This next portion is just the hunting of game species and unprotected species is allowed in a portion of the following park boundaries: Willamette River Greenway, Lucky Mute State Natural Area, Cottonwood Canyon State Park, Deschutes River State Recreation Area, La Pine State Recreation Area. We good with that?
I see Ryan's got his hand up, but
Right.
Oh, sorry. You can go back to mine, because my question was actually from above, with only real quick clarification on the, can you scroll up just a little further? So Government Island, scroll right there. In our rules currently, it's Government Island and Lemon Island. They are, I believe, two different properties. They're together, but they're separate, and we allow waterfowl hunting on Lemon Island also. So I don't know if we need to add that in there, back in there with Government Island, so that they're both included.
Is it a standalone park, Ryan, or is it a portion of?
It is. So they're separate from one another in the Columbia there, I believe, and that's why they're called out separately. But I mean, they're both part of. They're managed together, but they are a separate entity, and so that's why they're currently in our rules under the same letter, but they are two different properties. So it just, if we want to leave it both in E, that might be fine. We just need to add Government Island and Lemon Island in the same E together.
You think they'll always be together?
Yeah.
Okay. How do you spell it?
Lemon.
Oh, just like it sounds, lemon.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
So with that, Ryan, the current rule for that property says hunting's allowed not above the mean high water mark. And so really then hunting's allowed in the state waterway. It's a little bit of a redundant rule, but I think it probably helps clarify. Is it important that's occurring only within the kind of the state waters, the below high water mark? Do you know?
And that's a good question. So I noticed that same thing and I wasn't sure. And so, basically if we had this mapped, it would be a circle around our properties where hunting would be allowed and you wouldn't be allowed to hunt on our property, the way I kind of read it. So that's a good question. I don't have a good answer to why we kind of have it written that way, that it's, since it's not even really our property that we're allowing them to hunt on, they're allowed to hunt around it.
Bob?
For me, it's really saying that you can't hunt on government and Lemon Island, if that's the case.
It appears to be saying that, yes.
Because we're telling them it's only in the water, right?
It's a DSL jurisdiction.
So do we remove this altogether? Government Island and Lemon Island? Or
Would
do
it
we change this up here?
would it be helpful for me to talk to the park manager to get a little more clarification? Would that be acceptable to get a little more background if I can?
I think so.
Yeah.
Seems like everyone agrees.
Yeah, I think to that point, Ryan, it makes sense because maybe there's some limited areas where actually on the park it'd be suitable or allowable, but also when folks see these things, typically go, oh yeah, Government Island, I can go hunt there, and if we're really kind of precluding them from that, it's a nuance there, but when it comes to enforcement, having that specificity really helps.
I'll check in with them to see how they've been interpreting it over the years at least.
In this section for hunting waterfowl, do we also open it up to unprotected species as well? Do we want to do that at all?
Currently, you don't, because of the way it's currently written, and so this would also limit it to waterfowl. The waterfowl really kind of helps to limit the where.
Mm-hmm.
I think, like, say, example, Fort Stevens, I'm guessing we probably don't want a lot of other types of hunting going on at a park like a Fort Stevens or something like that. They are focused on providing waterfowl hunting, but beyond that, we probably don't want a lot of other.
I agree with Ryan. Yeah, I don't think we want that to happen there, but we should check our previous wording because I think we did say that it's going to be allowed when hunting is allowed. And so we just need to make sure we're not contradicting ourselves in that previous statement we generated.
Yeah, so D, unprotected species can only be hunted during authorized deer, elk, and game bird hunting seasons, except as authorized by park manager.
So I think as long as we say below that it's waterfowl hunting only, I think we're good.
Okay, that covers it, the unprotected species.
Yeah, I got to scratch my head on this one a little bit.
Yeah, I wonder if it's eliminated or if it's saying you can hunt for unprotected species, but not in the waterfowl locations. Like, are we saying that?
Well, so as I read it right now, the waterfowl only would preclude unprotected. It precludes deer, elk, and others. And so if that's the way that, and that's the way it currently is right now too. You can't shoot a nutria, you can't shoot a possum, you can't shoot a Eurasian collared dove within those designated areas. And so the question is, do you want to limit it to waterfowl hunting only by the term waterfowl, or do you limit it to waterfowl, allow upland, but then really get your where through your map and say, well, okay, we'll let you shoot unprotected, but we're really only letting you hunt that water interface. It's kind of the two ways to handle it, I think.
So hunting waterfowl and unprotected species is allowed in a portion of the following park boundaries. Refer to the hunting map for location and details. Does that sound right?
I don't really have a problem with it being a waterfowl only, I guess. We do that in some of our waterfowl hunting areas, just to really focus the hunting effort on waterfowl. I'm trying to think about these in particular, and it starts to get more complicated because when you say hunting waterfowl, when you add in unprotected, I think you then would want to tie it to the waterfowl seasons and not some of the other, deer, elk, or other time periods, because this is really tying it to waterfowl season timing also. So you'd almost have to say hunting waterfowl and unprotected species, but then tie that to the waterfowl season dates. Like it's almost easier just to say hunting waterfowl as current, as the current rules are.
My preference would be to leave it as hunting waterfowl, because knowing two of these parks very well, it really changes what's happening at the park. Like Bowers it's pushing 600 acres and it's roughly 300 upland, 300 wetter areas. So it really pushes the hunting away from the other usage. And same with Elijah Bristow, which has many horse trails, but also great places to hunt. But that really separates the two, so that the two groups aren't interacting much. And that's how it is currently. So it's not taking anything away.
Okay.
I agree with Scott, and I think the caveat here too is if we allow take of other animals, then we have to talk about method of take too. And so with waterfowl, we'll eliminate it to shotgun only, and so it's just cleaner this way.
And then when we put this out to public comment, if there's anyone that responds with wanting to hunt unprotected species in these locations, we can look at maybe adding that language to the property itself. Okay, coming back down here to hunting of game species, we talked about that. Everyone's good there, right? Thumbs up. Oh, one question from Mike.
Yeah, just sorry for the quick go back. I was trying to scramble and find some things here, but the Fort Stevens question, the only thing I had there, and Brian, maybe you know about this, but that's been part of that Clatsop Plains Oregon Solutions discussion, and I thought they were considering allowing some elk hunting on Fort Stevens, and so I don't know if that needs to be addressed separately or not, but the way this reads here, the only thing you can do there is hunt waterfowl, and I don't know if they're going to make a special exception there or how that would work was one comment I had. The other was just as we list this big list, and knowing that we're going to be including map resources there, if there's a change from, pick your favorite state park here, Elijah Bristow, where are we eliminating some areas that were currently allowed to hunt waterfowl, and now we're going to reduce that with the map exercise, just making sure we're depicting that or transparent on those things so folks can comment on it.
Okay.
So, thanks, Mike. Yeah, Elijah Bristow right now is fairly limited. I believe you can hunt waterfowl north of the main channel, and I can't remember where that's at. That's just from my memory. So it is listed, but yeah, I think your comment is really the kind of the devil's in the detail. Is this detail going to be worked out behind closed doors, or is groups like Oregon Hunters Association going to be able to look and participate in that part?
Sounds good.
The way it's the way it's set up at Elijah Bristow right now, there's a series of islands downstream of the core dam. And when you cross that, I believe it says the channel, it's basically a series of small islands of well, one of them's maybe like 60 acres, but of Elijah Bristow that you're allowed to hunt on. So it very much separates it from the rest of the park.
Yeah. So getting to the elk question, so something we can stick a pin in is, do you want to then have a rule that says, somewhere in here, like, or with, special authorization, kind of that caveat, because yes, the Clatsop Plains elk issue and the Oregon Solutions, could put maybe a need or a desire for state parks to be part of some of those solutions, and you don't want to have to go through the rule process again. There might be a situation where we've got some serious agricultural damage happening adjacent to a park, and kind of having a pretty stringent, like, yeah, this is going to be decided. If there's a deviation from this, we can have an or as authorized, but that's going to come from a pretty high up signatory.
So remind me again, it's called the Clatsop Plains Elk, what?
So Clatsop Plains Elk Collaborative. And so this was a Oregon Solutions project, one of the governor's Oregon Solutions projects that involved the counties, the state parks on that. There was like 26 different entities, members. I think Senator Johnson was on it, and I think OHA was there at the table. We were Tillamook County, Gearhart, city of Gearhart, a number of cities. And so really getting at how do we solve some of the urban elk issues around these Northwest Oregon communities that they're struggling with. And so state parks can be part of that solution. We just want to make sure that the rules give you the flexibility to do that.
Okay. Almost like add language as a buffer, just kind of be like in preparation of. And we could, in the hunting map, we can add a sentence that says changes in that hunting map could be posted for public comment on a website for like 30 days or so prior to the effective date. So if there is, any type of change that takes place, we can always put that in there and open it up for public comment too.
Okay.
We use similar wording in other areas of our park system, but I'll leave that in there as discussion point. Any other thoughts on Fort Stevens? I think somebody had their hand up. I don't see it right now. Was it?
I think Scott and I both had our hand up, and
Okay.
maybe he's going to say something similar. But we just so everybody knows, we do have the ability as management tools to authorize hunting and things like that outside of these hunting rules. So if there would be nothing that would preclude us from entering into a partnership and working on something like this outside of from a natural resource management standpoint, outside of this hunting and stuff like that. So we do that pretty regularly. If there's a nuisance animal, something like that, there's nothing that precludes us from working with a contractor or hiring somebody or working with a partnership to deal with something like that.
Scott, were you going to say something similar?
Pretty much exactly what Ryan said. But I do remember before I started, I've been told about for years, they had a controlled hunt at Elijah Bristow for elk because that Bristow herd had gotten so big. And it maybe happened 20 years ago. So I do know it happens.
Yeah, I think that happened around the park, and the park didn't participate in that one, but because there were elk causing damage and then moving onto the park during the day. And at the time, the OPRD wasn't interested in having some hunting on the park. And so that I think resulted in longer season around the park, more liberal bag limits and things to kind of account for that. But yeah, as long as there's room for the park to opt in very limited capacities, even individual authorization by authorization for a hunter, that's good to address those situations.
And so per Ryan's comment there, I'm assuming that's in a different administrative rule, maybe even a statute somewhere with that authorization there. And I'm just, I'm not one for making things more wordy, but having dealt with rules some before, I'm just wondering if, you even want to reference that other hunting may be authorized per whatever statute and rule there, and just kind of leave it at that. Just assuming that most folks, when they start talking hunting, if they're going to look at rules, are going to come to this one and look at that. So.
What's that language, Ryan? Natural resource. What's the discretion that managers have in that other rule that talks
Sorry,
about?
I would have to look it up to get the specifics, but it's basically for natural resource management purposes. We can.
Okay, that's good. I can look it up too. I just want to make sure I was on the right track. Yeah, and I would agree with you, Mike, to reference that rule in here too. It just makes it clean. Okay, so moving down back to the game species, I want to make sure that everyone's good with this language.
Yeah, the only thing, we use some terms like game mammals and game birds, and that might be a little better to use that.
And birds too?
Yeah, and game birds. Statutorily, those are defined. They have their own, like they're defined separate. There's a game mammal, game bird definition.
And remove the word species?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the only thing I have is maybe semantics, some kind of wordsmithing, and it's just that the Willamette River Greenway is not a park. It's parks, parklands, whatever, properties.
Yeah, and so that'll F's, I guess, game mammals, comma, game birds, and unprotected species.
Sorry, Brian, I didn't know you were still.
I was just, as you were talking, I was looking back at that, saying we have too many ands in that sentence.
Yeah. Otherwise, pretty good? Okay. Now let's talk about these dogs. Dogs used for hunting shall be kept on a leash except while accompanied by and in control of a licensed hunter when being used to hunt game birds, including going to or coming from hunting locations in a posted dog training area.
Ryan, does game birds from your standpoint cover waterfowl as well, or do those need to be differentiated?
That covers waterfowl as well. Because we're not differentiating it as upland game birds. So game birds includes both waterfowl and upland. So for G there, I'm not even sure we need the dogs used for hunting. You have a leash rule for dogs elsewhere that says dogs must be on leash. And so I would almost say dogs shall be kept on leash except while accompanied by and in control of a licensed hunter when being used to hunt game birds, including going to and from locations. And then you'll have the ability to post dog training areas. And that's pretty consistent with how we do it within ODFW rules.
Okay.
And I was just going to give a little background for Mike. This one was something that I brought to the group, and it was not really because of hunters. It was because of everyone telling me they were hunting when they had their dog off leash or training their dogs for hunting, trying to close that loophole on the other park users.
The fake hunters.
Yeah,
Helen,
and Mike, you may be familiar, we had a lot of the same issues with our wildlife areas where we allowed dogs off leash during hunting seasons. And then that meant wildlife areas that were managed for wildlife were turning into dog parks during that fall, winter, springtime period. And so we had to tighten that up and say it's on a leash except while you're actively hunting.
And then also clarifications on keeping them on leash, I think during nesting seasons and some other things in some of those wildlife areas. So
Yeah, and so this covers those nesting seasons and stuff too. So it's
perfect.
I like that.
Good.
Helena, can we wordsmith out a little bit though in A? If you go, let's see, while accompanied by and in control of a licensed hunter. So my dog is often in control of me, but I think that's what it's saying. It sounds like it's saying in control of a licensed hunter. If we could change it to like while accompanied by and
Controlled by
a licensed hunter. While accompanied by and controlled
other
by.
Can control, I think so. Controlled by
Controlled by a licensed hunter. So yeah.
well, accompanied and controlled by.
Can we just say while controlled by a licensed hunter? Because I mean, by default, they'll be accompanied by in that scenario.
The assumption is that if they are controlled by a licensed hunter, they're also accompanied, correct?
Correct.
If there's any wonky case scenario that comes out of that one, I'm throwing it in your court.
Okay.
Someone figured out a really creative way to say something different. I don't know. No, but
I think it's good you're clarifying just for the examples that Brian's brought up and just a number of scenarios. And then I think back to Scott's point there too, is trying to give the latitude to use dogs in a hunting situation, but not have dogs willy-nilly all the other times. So.
Mhm.
And I'm a dog owner. I get it. I totally get it. So.
Okay. And let's see, I think the rest of this was just the cleanup, the language that we removed. That's going to be pretty much spelled out in the hunting map. So all of these details about the lines and all of those boundaries will go into the hunting map.
And so back to my question on that, are we just basically eliminating the verbiage here and depicting those on a map and if that all stays the same as it was, that's we're a thumbs up. But if for some reason we're eliminating areas or paring things down because you expanded a campground or a safety zone or something like that, just as long as we're able to find that.
Yeah, it's basically what you just said. We're just taking all of this lingo and we're going to put it in a visual hunting map that makes it clear for the hunter to read and access, and then it feeds into any other mobile app that's kind of industry standards, just so that it's consistent all around. And then, like I said earlier, if we propose changing a map boundary or whatever, we'll open that up to public comment with a 30-day window, so folks can have time if that happens, in the future for whatever reason. So there's that public comment period. Because the goal really isn't to restrict or lessen hunting at state parks. It really is just to clean up the rule and make it clearer for folks to understand where they can hunt and how and with what.
Anytime we can clarify it for the hunters, for the park managers and for the enforcement folks, we're in favor of that.
Yep, definitely. And then this last portion is hunters may not erect structures or blinds with the exception of portable blinds and tree stands that must be removed daily. Just reworded a little bit. Good with that?
The only other thing I just, and I'll bounce this one off everybody here and Brian, is, you know, oftentimes on the wildlife areas, we clarify that you can't leave like decoys out overnight. Do you think it's worth having that clarification here in the case of waterfowl hunting?
So if I can jump in there, I do see decoys some, but mostly what I see is boats. We have trying to work through the process of how to do that. But a few parks, people drag boats in and hide them, you know, through the hunting season. And then the other thing I see a lot is game cameras. And I'm not quite sure where that falls in any of our rules. The game cameras left in the park. Brian, do you guys have any rules on those?
So our rule, kind of a blanket rule that covers all of our properties, is that visitors are prohibited from leaving personal or commercial property overnight on department-owned, managed, or controlled areas. I guess I should reword that. The way it reads is leaving personal or commercial property overnight on department-owned, managed, or controlled areas is prohibited except at campsites during authorized camping periods. And so that does not have a provision for posting game cameras or things to leave at night. There can be exceptions, you know, with a permit or authorization from the area manager. But you might, if you don't have a rule like that elsewhere in your, you know, because this is beyond, for us, this is not just for hunting users. That's a blanket rule for us, is you're not leaving your personal stuff on our property unless it's your campsite and you're camping.
You think we should add it here,
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have it elsewhere in your rules.
I don't know.
hate to reference rules within rules because it makes future rule
Yeah.
modifications so difficult. But if you don't have that elsewhere, you might put it here, and I would not necessarily make it specific to hunters. I would just, if it were me and our property, which, you know, we leave it as, you know, all persons are prohibited from leaving personal property overnight.
Yeah, Helena, we do have one rule, but it specifies day use area. So a person may not leave personal property or possessions overnight in a day use area without written permission from the park manager or designated park staff. So I think that would cover the majority of this. Maybe we even just reference that at OAR here.
The question I have here, and it's a bit loaded because the trail camera issue is burgeoning from a number of perspectives, technology wise and otherwise, and you just see those so much out there. And you know, in a case like a Willamette Greenway parcel, what if somebody wanted to leave a game camera out there to, you know, for whatever reason?
And for me,
is there an issue there?
You know, we actually use them quite a bit. They're very helpful, especially the versions that text you pictures. And we use them in areas that we have issues or having some kind of enforcement issue, generally not for game,
Right.
Unless there's something fun going on, you know, a bear or something around. But for me, it's always been, well, no one else is allowed to leave stuff in the park. I think the game camera is relatively harmless unless, you know, you don't want your picture taken on the trail, but no one else leaves items in the park. So that was kind of my approach.
Okay. I know that question had come up with my former agency employment days, and there are no rules, I don't think, at all, unless something's changed on state forest about using game cameras, leaving game cameras out there. But then you're kind of getting to this whole, you know, not leaving stuff out there that's going to become a dump site and things like that too. What's permitted is promoted. So I know the game camera thing it's coming up, and so just awareness there.
Paul, what's that OAR?
Just typed it in the chat.
Okay, cool. All right. So that pretty much concludes the review of the rule language. I will be cleaning this up and making sure that I go through and, clean up the language for clarity and grammar, and then I'll send you an updated version after this meeting for review, probably like in the next week or two. And then we'll go to public comment from like December to the late January, like January 24th. But if we're done here for the moment, or if we're done here, then I'd like to pull up a PowerPoint slide. Thumbs up if we're done here. Oh, we got one.
One quick one there. So you already answered one of my questions there in terms of when you were kind of estimating the public comment period, because I'll probably send out, we have these newsletters, and I'll just make folks aware that that's coming up probably on, I'll just characterize it as late December somewhere there. And when we get more specific dates, I can help at least get that out to our membership. Are you thinking it would be the same time frame for the maps as well, the draft maps?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So thumbs up here. We're good to close this one out. All right. And then we will bring up a PowerPoint slide that Katie is going to load up here in a minute. So next step for the Rule Advisory Committee is for us to discuss any fiscal or economic impact that you foresee these changes having on either state agencies, local government, businesses, or individuals. Would this impact any small businesses? Just opening that up for discussion. Does this change anything for maybe hunting tour guides, or I don't know?
At least from what I've seen here, and I just offer the perspective that I'm not really seeing like a broad expansion or any curtailment of really existing opportunities or rules. It's just more around clarification. So with the tools that are out there now, and if these things come up on a commercially available product like an Onyx, I think was the example we're using. There might be, people kind of like, oh wow, I can do that there. I can go deer hunting at Cottonwood or something like that. I suppose there could be a minor impact or increase in use there, but I don't know that it would be anything significant in those ways. And I have no idea at all how OPRD handles if you had, for instance, a licensed guide that wanted to do some waterfowl hunting guiding, like on a Willamette Greenway parcel. I'm assuming there's some sort of commercial permit they would need to get from OPRD or something, but I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with Mike. I don't see a substantial change here. Really clarifying things, making the rules cleaner and clearer without a huge change. So I don't see a huge impact on businesses or users as opposed to what the previous rules were.
Okay. And do you think that this has any additional impact on enforcement? Or, I mean, I know that we're trying to clean things up so that it's clear. I just want to make sure, and there's no one here from OSP, but I just want to make sure, just to clarify, if there's any additional costs, either on their end or any additional costs from ODF&W for the work on the rules and regulations piece. Put that out there and then ask Scott.
I was going to say, I think it will help with enforcement. ODF or I'm sorry, OSP has been asking for years for me to give them a spreadsheet or something of where people can hunt, and I'll create one. And then, just like any agency, their troopers move on to a different location. So we kind of start back over. So I think it'll be very beneficial for enforcement. There might be, like Mike said, a small increase in hunting, which is great. There's plenty of room I speak for the greenways. There's plenty of room out there during hunting season for them to enjoy them. It's good to have, for me, good to have, trying to find a nice way to put it, responsible park users in the park. So, I think it's good.
Scott, have you been out on those parcels during a hard freeze during the waterfowl season?
I have.
You cannot, I mean, a lot of those are county park systems where the launches are at, and you can't find a place to park in those places because there's all of us doggone hunters that are out there chasing ducks during those periods. So,
Hardy fellows.
yeah.
So yeah, I also agree, both from an ODFW standpoint, and I really can't completely speak for OSP, but I know both agencies get a lot of questions about where and what can be done regarding hunting on state park properties, both in the Willamette, which is a little bit more complicated just because of the size and scattered nature of that, but also on other parks. And so I see a big benefit of this being the maps, and if those are readily available and we can point people to them, I see the impacts on both of our agencies being positive.
Great. All right, so it doesn't sound like there's any additional costs to any of these entities. Economically, we may see an increase in hunting, which would be good. And then just clarity in general, just information sharing and brokering information about where hunting takes place and pointing to a hunting map that's clear and has the icons that people are used to or familiar with, right? Okay, next slide. So our next steps, we're going to open up public comments December 1st. And like I said, we'll probably have those running through January 24th. Just because it's holiday season and we want to make sure people have a lot of time to get back in from their hunting gear and put all that away and have a time to comment. We will share the comments with the Oregon Parks and Recreation Commission. And we will also have a report that will go to the commission with our recommendation on any of the revisions to these proposed rules. And the commission would then vote to adopt the rule changes as they've been proposed, or they may make amendments based on the comments that we receive. They may seek additional public comment on these rule changes or choose not to move forward with the proposed rule changes at this time. So just so you know that those are 4 variables that could take place when we put this in front of the commission, which we plan to do in February, middle of February. And public comments can be made in 3 different ways. Online at the website listed there on the screen. We'll also have that posted on our website. People can write their comments into us at the address listed there. Or they can email us at oprd.publiccomment@oregon.gov. And I think that's probably oprd.publiccomment@oprd.oregon.gov. It'll still get to us. We've just changed our email. But we will be accepting these comments through that time period.
Helena, is there any chance, I was going to cheat, see if you can just email me that slide?
Yeah, we'll email everybody this slide. Does that sound good?
Sounds great. And what I'll do is I'll just include at least the web page in a short update for folks. So if they want to see it on December 1st, but they're all going to want to look at the maps. That's what we do.
Right. We'll also have a public hearing date with a date to be announced. And that way it will just be an opportunity for folks to provide comments or clarifications for that too. And we'll have that date posted on our website and send out to you all, and then you could forward it on to your folks, but it'll probably be in January.
Perfect.
All right. Any last thoughts or comments?
I just say I appreciate the opportunity to be involved here on the front end here. I think we really appreciate the opportunity to kind of engage on the front rather than just on the comment side on the back side. So hopefully it's been useful for you as well.
Definitely. Yeah. Your input and your area of expertise really does help kind of provide the guidance for the language that we want to use so that it's a good balance of what we're trying to accomplish here.
Yeah, I would say, Mike, you're just down the road from me. We should go out on the river together.
You know, my home stretch for floating in my ancient canoe is always from like Peoria to Corvallis because it's super close for me. And I actually live along the Calapooya, but if you've ever tried to float the Calapooya, it's just, you spend more time getting out and
Climbing logs.
yeah, climbing logs. It's a lot easier to go on the Willamette. So
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time again. And we will be sending information to you out in the next week or so.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank
Donna.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.